Miracle African Tales. The painful betrayal. The streets of Port Harcourt had never been kind to dreamers. They welcomed ambition but made you pay a steep price for it. The city was a battlefield, one where only the toughest survived, and survival meant knowing how to fight for your place, no matter what it took. Nora and Valerie had learned this the hard way. They met as teenagers, two girls thrown together by circumstance and bound by struggle. University had been a constant war against hunger, late-night cramming sessions by candlelight, and the sharp sting of reality that success was not guaranteed, no matter how hard you worked. Nora had always been the quieter one, the girl who blended into the background. She was smart, determined, and strategic in her thinking. She believed in the long game, the slow, calculated climb to the top. But if she was the planner, Valerie was the fire. Valerie was the kind of woman who turned heads effortlessly, the kind who made men forget their words when she walked into a room. But beauty had never been her currency. She despised the idea of using her looks to get ahead. She wanted power, independence, and a career that spoke louder than her face. They had spent years clawing their way through university, selling thrift clothes, tutoring rich students who had no interest in passing on their own, skipping meals just to afford textbooks. They had suffered, together. And that suffering had bound them. Then came the heartbreak. Valerie's fall had been the kind that shattered her into 1,000 pieces. The kind that made a woman build walls so high, no one dared to climb them. She had loved once, and it had nearly destroyed her. Now, love was nothing but a distant memory, something she neither wanted nor trusted. And yet, the men kept coming. Everywhere she went, they followed, powerful men, ambitious men, men who wanted to claim her. She turned them all away, unmoved, uninterested. But Nora had never been so lucky. For all her intelligence, all her patience, all her strategy, love never came easily for her. Men didn't flock to her the way they did to Valerie. They never burned with obsession for her. And the ones that did, they left just as quickly as they arrived. She wasn't blind to the irony of it. Valerie, the woman men would do anything to have, didn't want them. And she, the one who craved companionship more than she admitted, was left with nothing. But she had money now. The oil firm had changed everything. She had climbed the ladder steadily, carefully, securing her position in an industry dominated by men. And with money came power. With power came the ability to bend the rules. And so she bent them. She didn't call it paying for love, not exactly. But she knew what she was doing. Expensive gifts. Weekend trips. Lavish dinners. She knew men liked the idea of a woman with wealth, one who could offer them something beyond beauty. She wasn't naive. She knew they didn't stay for her. They stayed for what she could give. And when the money stopped, so did they. She never told Valerie the full extent of it. She didn't need to. Valerie lived in a different world, one where rejection was a choice, not a sentence. And as time passed, as Valerie dismissed suitor after suitor with a casual indifference, something inside Nora began to shift. It wasn't jealousy, not at first. But then came the questions, the sleepless nights. Why her? Why did men look at Valerie like she was the sun and moon combined, even as she rejected them without a second thought? Why did Nora have to beg to be loved? Why was she always the one left behind? She told herself it didn't matter. That her career was enough. That she was building something bigger than love. But late at night, when the loneliness crept in, she couldn't help but wonder. What would it feel like to be wanted the way Valerie was? And worse, what would it feel like if Valerie ever decided to say yes? When shadows betray. The first time Nora saw him, she thought nothing of it. It was at a business conference, one of those high-profile events where the air was thick with expensive cologne, power, and whispered negotiations worth billions. She had only attended because her boss insisted. Oil and gas was a world of connections, and while Nora preferred to let her work speak for itself, she understood the necessity of networking. She stood at the bar, sipping a glass of red wine, watching as powerful men and women discussed deals that would change the landscape of industries. Then, she felt it, a presence. She turned slightly, and there he was. Tall. Refined. The kind of man whose wealth wasn't just in his tailored suit or the expensive watch on his wrist, but in the effortless way he carried himself. His confidence wasn't loud, yet it filled the space around him. Interesting choice of drink, he said, eyeing her wine glass. Nora raised a brow. Why? Do I look like I should be drinking something stronger? His lips curved into a smirk. No, but I imagine a woman like you is used to making strong choices. She should have smiled, maybe even been flattered. Instead, she gave a polite nod and turned back to her drink. Men like him were everywhere in Port Harcourt, rich, powerful, and always looking for the next conquest. She wasn't interested. But he didn't walk away. Kolu, he introduced himself, holding out a hand. Nora hesitated before shaking it briefly. Nora. She expected him to press further, to launch into a conversation meant to impress her, but he simply nodded and leaned against the bar, ordering a drink. And for the rest of the evening, he didn't bother her again. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. The relentless pursuit. Over the next few weeks, Kolu appeared in her world in ways that felt too coincidental to be accidents. At a board meeting, he was a silent investor in a major oil deal her company was handling. At a real estate dinner Valerie had dragged her to, he was a guest speaker, discussing investment opportunities. Each time, he acknowledged her with a simple nod, a small smile, never pushing too hard. It was infuriating. Then the messages started. Hope your day went well. Ran into a colleague of yours today. He had great things to say about you. There's a new restaurant opening next week. I'd like to take you there. Just dinner, nothing more. She ignored them all. She didn't want to be another woman charmed by a man with wealth. She had fought too hard to be independent, to stand on her own without a man's influence. But Kolu wasn't the type to be easily discouraged. The more she resisted, the more he found ways to subtly insert himself into her world. He never overwhelmed her, never demanded her attention. He just waited. And it was that patience that started to shake her resolve. The unspoken envy. Valerie was the first to notice. You're rejecting men again, she said one evening, lounging in Nora's apartment. Nora sighed, pouring herself a drink. I'm just not interested. Valerie studied her. But this one is different, isn't he? Nora hesitated, then shrugged. He's persistent, that's all. And rich, Valerie added, almost absent-mindedly. The kind of man every woman in this city would kill to have. Something in her tone made Nora pause. She turned to look at her friend, but Valerie's expression was unreadable. You think I should give him a chance? Nora asked, almost teasingly. For the first time, Valerie hesitated. Maybe, just this once. But that night, as Valerie lay in bed, her thoughts were dark and restless. Why was it always Nora? Why had Kolu, one of the most desirable men in Port Harcourt, set his eyes on the one woman who wasn't even trying? Valerie had spent years watching men worship her beauty, only for them to leave when she refused to open her heart. And now, when she was finally considering love again, when she was ready to let someone in, Nora, the woman who never sought attention, had captured the interest of the kind of man Valerie had always dreamed of. It wasn't fair. It didn't make sense. Unless Nora had something else. Something unnatural. Falling, despite herself. It took months before Nora gave in. Kolu didn't push, didn't pressure. He was simply there, a steady presence, showing up when she least expected him. And one night, after an exhausting day at work, when loneliness weighed heavy on her, she found herself responding to one of his messages. Fine. One dinner. That's all. That dinner turned into late-night conversations. Into stolen moments. Into something she couldn't deny. She fell, despite herself. And when she finally admitted it, when she finally allowed herself to love him back, it was unlike anything she had ever known. Kolu loved her fiercely, openly, without hesitation. For the first time, she was wanted. Not because of her money, not because of what she could offer, but simply because she was Nora. A friend's silent war. Valerie smiled through it all. She congratulated Nora, teased her about finally giving in, even helped her pick out outfits for dates. But every night, as she lay awake, the bitterness grew. She should have been the one Kolu loved. She was the one men always wanted. So why was she the one begging, while Nora had a man who worshipped her? There was no way this was natural. No way Kolu had fallen so hard, so fast, without something else influencing him. Juju. The word whispered itself in her mind like a dark temptation. Had Nora done something? Used something? Because how else could she explain it? She needed proof. She needed to be sure. And as the wedding approached, an idea began to take shape. A test. One that would either expose Nora for what she was, or destroy her completely. The night that shattered everything. The wedding was nothing short of a dream. Port Harcourt's elite had gathered at one of the most luxurious hotels in the city. Every detail had been planned to perfection: the white orchids, the soft golden lighting, the extravagant but tasteful decor. Nora, in a gown that clung to her like a second skin, walked down the aisle with a kind of nervous excitement she had never known before. Kolu was waiting for her at the altar, his eyes filled with something so deep, so consuming, that it took her breath away. For the first time in her life, she felt safe. For the first time, she allowed herself to believe in happiness. But happiness, she would learn, was never meant to last. The reception was a whirlwind of celebration. Laughter, dancing, glasses clinking. Valerie was right beside her, all smiles, her arm around Nora's waist as they took picture together. You did it, Valerie whispered, pressing a kiss to her cheek. I'm happy for you. The words should have reassured Nora. Instead, they unsettled her. There was something in Valerie's voice, something that didn't quite match the warmth of her expression. But she brushed it off. It was her wedding day. She refused to let her mind wander to dark places. As the night wore on, exhaustion crept in. Kolu was still surrounded by guests, engaged in conversations that felt endless. The weight of the dress, the emotions of the day, it all became too much. I just need a minute, Nora whispered to Valerie. To catch my breath. Valerie nodded immediately. Go rest. I'll check on Kolu. And that was the moment it all began to unravel. Kolu barely had time to register Valerie's presence when she slipped into his suite. The room was dimly lit, quiet, the kind of atmosphere that made everything feel intimate. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. Nora's resting. Valerie nodded. She was exhausted. There was something different about her tonight. The way she moved, the way her eyes lingered on him just a little too long. She walked closer, pouring herself a drink from the bar in the room. You really love her, don't you? Kolu smiled. With everything in me. Valerie laughed softly, swirling the drink in her glass. That's rare. Loving someone that deeply. There was an edge to her voice, something almost resentful. Kolu glanced at her, sensing a shift in the air. Valerie, are you okay? She set her glass down and stepped closer. Do you know how lucky you are, she murmured. To have a woman like Nora. Kolu chuckled. Of course, I do. No, she whispered. You don't. And before he could process what was happening, she reached for him. A hand on his chest. A slow, lingering touch. Kolu froze. Valerie. I could make you feel something even stronger, she whispered, pressing closer. Something deeper. His mind reeled. Was this some kind of joke? I think you've had too much to drink, he said, gently pushing her away. But Valerie was relentless. You don't have to pretend, she whispered, running a finger down his jaw. I know you feel it too. Stop, Kolu snapped, stepping back. But Valerie only smiled. A slow, knowing smile. You think you love her, don't you? She murmured. You think she's perfect. Kolu clenched his jaw. I know I love her. Valerie took another step forward, her eyes dark with something dangerous. Then let me tell you the truth about your wife. And then, she dropped the first lie. She can't have children. Kolu stilled. What? She doesn't have a womb. Valerie's voice was low, deliberate. She's been with so many men, Kolu. She lied to you. She used something unnatural, to make you love her. Kolu shook his head. That's not true. Valerie exhaled. I didn't want to say anything. But I can't stand by and watch you live a lie. And then, with tears brimming in her eyes, she played her final move. She stepped closer, wrapping her arms around herself like a woman in distress. She did something to me too, Kolu, she whispered. Something dark. I tried to fight it, but I couldn't. Kolu's breath caught in his throat. Valerie, what are you saying? Her voice trembled. I didn't mean for this to happen, she whispered. But she made me do things. She made me sleep with you. Silence. A silence so heavy, so deafening, that it pressed against the walls. Kolu stepped back as if he had been physically struck. What? Valerie wiped a tear from her cheek. I tried to stop it. But she's not who you think she is. And with that, the seed was planted. A seed that would grow into something monstrous. Something that would destroy everything. When Nora woke the next morning, she expected to find Kolu beside her. Instead, she found silence. Cold. Empty. Unsettling. She searched for him, her heart pounding. And when she finally found him, standing by the window, his back turned to her, she knew. Something was wrong. Kolu, she whispered. He didn't turn around. Nora stepped closer, reaching for him. What's wrong? His voice, when it came, was hoarse. Is there something you need to tell me? Her stomach clenched. What are you talking about? And then, he turned. And the look in his eyes shattered her. Cold. Distant. Almost disgusted. Her throat tightened. Kolu, whatever you think you know. Did you sleep with other men? The question was a slap. Nora staggered back. What? No. Why would you? Do you even have a womb? His voice cracked. Tell me the truth. Something inside her shattered. Kolu, where is this coming from? He ran a hand over his face, looking broken, betrayed. From someone who cares about me. Nora's word tilted. Valerie. She knew it in her bones. But she couldn't prove it. And as the days passed, the walls of their marriage crumbled. Kolu withdrew. The warmth, the love, it all faded. The house became a battlefield. Accusations. Cold silences. Nights spent apart. Until one evening, with tears streaming down her face, Nora finally whispered the words that had been choking her for weeks. "Send me away." Kolu's eyes flickered. "What?" "I don't want to bring a child into this," she whispered. "Not into this war." For the first time, he hesitated. She swallowed back her pain. "Don't get me pregnant. And when you're ready, let me go." And just like that, the last piece of her heart crumbled.